John didn't like her. When David was being born, she stopped John in the kitchen and asked him to do something. John called her an old bitch and ran down the road before she could catch him. He got a licking from his father later on. There was a huge garden on the farm, and every year Mother insisted on carrying 100 quarts of every vegetable to carry them through the winter. There was a 12-foot by 15-foot bin just for potatoes. All the corn cobs were dried and used to cure the bacon and ham. Crocks were used to pickle meats and corned beef, as there was no freezer. John says he never ate better in his life than when he was growing up. All their food was homemade and delicious. The girls all learned to cook and bake at a young age.
I can vaguely remember them using the Dutch oven or whatever the technical name for that was in back of the stove.
On the brick wall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I vaguely remember them putting corn cobs in there and smoking hams. I was just a little kid.
Oh.
You know, was got plenty of food.
Mm-hmm.
But it was good. It was a good life. We thought we were abused at the time, but we had it pretty damn good.
Nancy remembers making donuts and breads with her mother at age 8. Every fall they picked bushels and bushels of apples. They made cider and drank it every day until it started to turn. Then Dad would barrel it up and take it to the cellar, because Mother hated drinking. She knew it was happening, but she didn't allow it in her house. They were poor, but they never knew any better. Each of the children got a new pair of shoes every year in time for school to start.
I mean, we had one pair of shoes a year. Mm-hmm. Never even heard of sneakers or loafers or sandals. It was one pair of shoes, and I'd get mine for my birthday, and I could wear them that day, and then I had to put them up until school started in September. But they didn't quite go. And along about May, get home from school, and I'd have to cut cardboard to put in the soles. And then by the end of the next day, the cardboard was all worn through, and do the same thing the next night.
Howard had to accept his daughters would be married, and he had to accept, or at least tolerate, future sons-in-law. Babe Ackerman married Howard's daughter Nettie. Babe is fun and loud. One spring morning, Babe was helping with the manure pile when he pulled out a forkful of snakes, still sluggish from hibernating. He turned to Howard with the snakes and said, "Howard, would you look at that?" and deposited the snakes right at Howard's feet.
You know, those snakes were like, you know, they weren't even moving hardly.
Oh.
Because there was a big ball of them there. Yeah, they were hibernating, yeah. And just one of them was old Father D, and boy, he let a war whoop out of him, and he ran all the way from that manure pile all the way up to the house. And that's a long hike, and it's all uphill. I wasn't too proud about that later, when I found out he was deathly afraid of snakes.
Well, my mother didn't like Babe, and he was not allowed in the house.
Really?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Did that change when you got married?
Yeah. She didn't like me any better, but I could get in the house. And you know, after all those pile of snakes I threw at Father D, he and I got along famously. We always get along good. Father D and I.
You threw a shoe at him one night and hit him in the head. Remember that?
Drew blood, yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Smartened him up. He didn't give me any more left.
Just before you were married or after?
Before.
And they still let you get married?
I was 21, there was nothing they could do about it. Well, my mother told me, you know, don't ask me to be in any of the pictures because I'm not going to have my picture taken.
She said that? Yeah. Was she the tough parent?
I went to Dad when I turned 18 and I said, I want to go out with Babe. And he said, well,
Sucks to be you.
he said that he tried to handle the boys.
And he left the girls
Oh,
up
right.
to,
Pass the buck.
yeah.
No, her mother didn't care for me, but when we were getting, she knew we were getting married, she made all kinds of canned goods and stuff for
Pie
us.
jars for us.
That's
When I got my diamond, I went home that night and I showed it to her, and she was reading a letter from John, probably. But anyway, I showed her my diamond, and she said, "Well, I suppose that makes you happy."
Babe was not an immediate favorite of the man he came to know affectionately as Father D, but neither was his good friend Joe, who married Jane, or Tink, who married Sue, and was spoken to a few times about his colorful language in front of the ladies. We suspect Mac may have been met with approval when he married Mary, because Mac's father and Howard were good buddies. Coburn Pushy was the oldest of Howard and Nettie's 13 children, born November 28, 1919, at Lyme, New Hampshire. Cobb graduated high school in 1937, attended University of New Hampshire for a while, then was drafted into World War II. He went through basic training in Texas and spent the rest of his tour of duty in Australia and New Zealand. He wasn't home for 5 years. In 1945, on leave, while he was stationed in New Guinea, he married Jessie Alice Oliphant of Perth, Australia. She was serving in the Australian Women's Air Force. They were married in Perth in a small ceremony just before Cobb ended his tour of duty. Jess came to America on a war bride ship. These were ships full of women who married servicemen. Upon her arrival in the States, Jess was met with mixed reviews by the family. She was a stranger from a strange land with a strange accent. Cobb completed his degree at the University of New Hampshire upon returning from war and moved with Jess to Ithaca, New York to receive a degree in veterinary medicine from Cornell University, graduating in 1951. While in New York, they had 2 children, Stephen Ronald, born January 28, 1949, and Suzanne Michelle, born May 13, 1951. When Suzanne was 2 years old, the family moved to Maine, where Cobb practiced as a vet. He held free vaccination clinics for dogs and made weekly inspections of the local slaughterhouse.
And so he'd be off and running in the morning all over the place, and then he'd have office hours in the afternoon, then he'd be off again, would come home and wolf them something, standing up in the office hours in the evening.
Wow, so
Yeah.
you never saw him.
I didn't know.
Then the family relocated to Australia to spend time with Jess's family, experience a different kind of life, and visit the place where Cobb and Jess began their life together.
And it was a time when Australia would pay for your whole family's passage over, as long if they need your profession.
Okay.
And you commit to stay at least 2.5 years. So that's how we went.
4 years later, the family moved to Terre Haute, Indiana, where Cobb did animal research at Pfizer Laboratories for several years. Steve and Suzanne attended college in New England, so Cobb and Jess returned to Maine to be closer to their children and the rest of their family. Cobb continued to practice veterinary medicine with the Department of Agriculture in large animal disease control, with seasonal work as a racetrack veterinarian, retiring in 1986 to Norway, Maine. Jess died of cancer in May 1986. Cobb wrote,
"She only lived 3 months after the diagnosis, most of that time in the hospital, as we both hung desperately to the hope she would respond favorably. She had one of over 100 kinds of cancer. It's a bad one, slow developing and amenable to treatment. Though chemotherapy, radiation, medication, and supportive measures were of little help, the doctors were only able to relieve the worst of her pain. I believe I was tender and attentive during her final illness. I like to believe I may have contributed in some measure to making the ordeal easier for her. It was too little, too late, neither retribution for all my past errors of commission an omission nor compensation for all the generous and genuine acts of love she had given me. I wasn't with her when she died, but the nurses assured me one of them was with her through the night, and that she did die quietly and peacefully.
Jess's ashes were sprinkled off the coast of her native Australia at a place she loved in her younger days. Cobb was a mason and a Shriner for many years. He served as master of both the Dresden Lodge and Oxford Lodge in 1978 and 1983, respectively. He was also past Deputy Grand Master of the 10th Masonic District. He enjoyed gardening and working with his hands, playing bridge and cribbage, and was an amateur writer, the co-author of several articles in professional journals and 2 historical books. Cobb was 78 when he died on September 11, 1998, at Stevens Memorial Hospital. His ashes were sprinkled off the coast of Maine in hopes that someday one little speck of his ashes would find one little speck of Jess's ashes, and they would be together again. Richard Howard was born December 29, 1921, in Lyme, New Hampshire. Richard, affectionately known to all who loved him as Dick, graduated high school and met Laura Pike, also of Lyme, at a local dance. The two were betrothed. Then Dick was drafted into the military and served in the Air Force for World War II. He was stationed in India and served as a supply officer and a driver. While in India, as the story goes, Dick apparently got into some bad bananas and never ate another banana the rest of his life. While he was away, he kept in touch with Laura through letters and cards and the occasional picture. The siblings took good care of Laura, and she spent many overnights with the older girls. Upon his return home, Dick and Laura were reunited. On June 23, 1946, they were married in Lyme Baptist Church. Laura moved out west to Washington State. They stayed out there a year. Dick worked at an oyster shell plant, and Laura taught first and second and third grades. In 1949, they moved back to New Hampshire. They bought a home in Meriden and had 2 children. Cynthia Carroll was born March 12, 1950, and Edward Alfred, February 20th, 1954. They farmed in Meriden, and Dick was a tax collector for Plainfield. Dick and his family bought the farm from Howard after Nettie died in 1958. Dick also served on the school board as superintendent of Sunday school. Laura spent some time as a stay-at-home mom, but in the summers she worked at the kitchen at Camp Pinnacle. Dick sold off parts of the farm, keeping the house and some land. He worked at Nichols Hardware for 13 years. Dick had his first angina attack when he was 49 years old, about 1970. He was a true stubborn degouche, and things like this wouldn't slow him down or change his habits. This eventually led to a quadruple bypass. About 1975, Dick partnered with Dick Banker to operate Bankers and Degouche hardware store in East Thetford, Vermont. This endeavor lasted 2 years. Then Dick secured a supervisory position at Dartmouth Printing in Hanover, New Hampshire. Dick and Laura divorced in 1975. Laura stayed in the farmhouse, and Dick found an apartment in East Thetford, Vermont. Dick married Doris Colton in 1981. She was a realtor. After he retired from Dartmouth Printing in 1984, they started Degouche Realty and shared a life for several years. Any person who entered their home would find a jigsaw puzzle spread across the dining room table, and a deck of cards and cribbage board could always be found on the coffee table. Dick kept a vegetable garden, and every year he produced the most luscious green vegetables, corn and carrots too. He even grew pumpkins and was in competition with his brothers to see who could grow the most or the biggest. His youngest brother David has even suggested there may have been a little friendly mischief, possibly, we dare say, even cheating, as David suspects some of the other brothers may have injected milk into the pumpkin vine to make it grow bigger. We probably will never know the truth. Dick suffered a stroke in 1987.
I have an uncle who's had stroke. I had an aunt who had stroke. My dad had arteriosclerosis. I have a brother who's had bypass. And so it's not foreign to my family. And if I think I can, I will. I want to. And but I get out in the kitchen and mess around. I make the coffee every morning, and I plan to make a beef stew this afternoon. And there's some things I want to do or would like to do that I can't do. I wish I could and do something else. Time doesn't hang on my shoulders.
Doris fell sick with cancer. Cobe moved in for a while to help take care of her. She died the day before Dick's birthday, December 28, 1989. After Doris's death, Dick began traveling. He and Cobe visited their cousin Ruth Hiltz in Nevada. This trip may have been the beginning of the book that Cobe and Ruth wrote, Ephraim Begat Moses, about Degouche genealogy, which inspired this project. 6 weeks after his 70th birthday, Dick succumbed to his heart condition. He died of a heart attack February 7th, 1992. He was the first of his siblings to make the transition into the next world. Ellsworth Jeffers Degouche, known to everyone as Stub, was born May 30th, 1924, in Lyme, New Hampshire. Stub did not graduate high school. He went as far as sophomore year. He started at Hanover High and missed a lot of school because his older brothers were already serving in World War II, and he was left as the oldest to help with the farm. His parents signed the papers for him to enter the Navy at the age of 17. Stubb served in the Navy for World War II in the Pacific, in Japanese waters, and he hated rice because it had been the staple in Japan. Stubb married Ida Pike in 1948. They had 2 daughters, Eileen Judith, born September 26, 1952, and Anita Ellen, born February 14, 1956, in Hanover. Stubb and Ida bought a dairy farm in East Johnson, Vermont. He ran his farm like a business, for family and hired help alike. There was a job to get done, and it better be done right. Stubb hosted a number of family gatherings during which, over the years, cousins remember a calf being born breech and a puppy given as a gift, run over, and Cobe spending the day trying to save it. The barn was full of cats. There was swimming in the brook under the covered bridge, and softball games and horseshoes in the field. Stubb and Ida divorced in the late 1960s. Stubb kept the farm, and Ida and the girls moved to downtown Johnson. Stubb married Winifred Gates on August 17, 1968. After he sold the farm in the late 70s, Stubb spent time working a veal farm. Stubb also divorced Winnie. Stubb enjoyed spending time as a mason and shriner. He joined while he was married to Ida. He built a dragon float for the shrine parade and wore his fez proudly. Stubb died September 19, 1997, in his sleep at the age of 73. Anne Degouche, the first daughter, was born September 16, 1925, in Lyme, New Hampshire. Anne attended Orford High School, graduating in 1938. Anne married Roscoe Carter. They had 2 boys and 2 girls. Carl Richard was born March 18, 1947. David Jeffers, born February 17, 1948. Roxanne Julia, born June 10, 1953. And Karen Sue, born July 23, 1955. Roscoe delivered milk and did some farm work on the side. Anne has made Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls for almost every child born to this family, probably since she learned to sew. Anne speaks freely about her battle with alcohol. She admits she probably drank the most when her sons were in Vietnam, and she is justifiably proud of her sobriety over 30 years without a drink.
And we held hands, and as soon as that touch, we started the Lord's Prayer. It was my first spiritual awakening, and the culture to drink, because that would be, I was thinking about going home and having a drink on this, and it left, and it never came back.
Anne will correct anyone who spells her name wrong. Remember, it's A-N-N-E. Don't forget the E. She's English, you know. Mary DeGoosh was born September 25th, 1927, in Hanover, New Hampshire. April 10th, 1949, she married Malcolm Duane Wing. They had 2 daughters, Deborah Jane, born July 6th, 1952, and Barbara Ann, February 8th, 1954. Mac and Mary lived in Londonderry, New Hampshire. Mac was a banker, and Mary was a hairdresser out of her own shop in her home. Mary scheduled her hair appointments around her children's school schedule. Craig DeGoosh wrote that any time he asked his father David about his mother, his response was always, "If you want to know what your grandmother was like, just look to your Aunt Mary. She's as close as you'll ever get to meeting her." She never spoke a foul word. It has even been said Mary wouldn't say shit if she had a mouth full of it. However, she was not immune to the possibility of a little white lie in the name of parenting.
Only place where people could drop in right when she was preparing dinner for 2. It could turn into dinner for 12.
Yeah.
She, go to the basement, go to the cellar and out jars of this and jars of that and make some rolls and make this and take that and turn it into a banquet.
Wow.
We weren't there for longer than an hour without eating or playing a game.
Yeah. I remember playing cards at her.
Oh, cards or Scrabble or cheesy or something.
Mary died of a heart condition. Jane was the 6th child of Howard and Nettie, born June 26, 1929, in Hanover, New Hampshire. She started first grade at the age of 8. Jane worked at Loch Lime Lodge in the summers during sophomore year, helping out in the kitchen. Jane and Sue spent one summer there doing laundry. Jane graduated high school in 1949. Mother and Stub made her stay in school. She had wanted to quit, but they made sure she graduated, and she did, top of the class. She lived on the farm until after a 5-year courtship, she married Reginald Harold Kramer, whom everyone called Joe, in 1950. Together, they had 4 children: Rebecca Jane, December 15, 1951, Reginald Harold III, June 16, 1953, Timothy Howard, April 18, 1957, and Donna Lynn, born August 5, 1961. Jane was a stay-at-home mother until her youngest, Donna, was in the 5th grade, when she started doing the books for the family business. Jane was superintendent of Sunday school, a coach of basketball and softball, and also served as Fairleigh town clerk for a number of years. Currently, Jane and Joe are enjoying retired life, which includes 10 grandchildren and 18 great-grandchildren. They have lived in the same house for 30 years. They sold their house to their son Reg several years ago and stay on as good tenants. Sue was born September 20th, 1930 in Hanover, New Hampshire. She married Clayton Webster Hadlock Jr., or Tank, in Arkansas, where he was stationed. He was a Hanover boy who was drafted to the Army and saw combat in Japan. They had 4 children: Jerry, born in 1957, Roger, born July 17, 1959, Diane, February 16, 1962, and Peter, January 11, 1967. Sadly, Jerry died at only 3 years old. Sue married Len Alexander, and they are living out their golden years in Florida. John Sylvester DeGouche was born July 10th, 1932, in Lyme, New Hampshire. He attended school through the 8th grade. He joined the Navy as early as he could. While in the Navy, he learned to play poker quite well, probably because there was no war going on at the time. A lot of downtime meant a lot of time playing cards.